morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. No grandchildren duties, keeping you away. Very happy to introduce this morning Joy Blizzard as our speaker, and it's on the subject of love, food, hate, waste. Something I feel we're all very interested in at the moment and thinking more and more about. She spent over 20 years involved in campaigning to help people recycle more waste. Recycle more and waste less, that's it. Okay, on we go. Hopefully we can all learn how to help combat the UK's annual 2.5 billion waste problem. So, over to Joy. Thank you.
Hello, can you all hear me? Excellent. Thank you very much. I love coming to talk to u3a. I start feeling intelligent just by kind of osmosis. How many of you households have heard me speak before? Just a few stalwart WI members. That's okay. Things always change, so you won't be too bored, I hope. I have got a little health warning before I start this talk, okay? This talk is likely to seriously upset some of your assumptions and your worldview. There's sometimes, I've done this many times, and it's great, always great for a live audience because you always get a different feel. The best way to enjoy this talk is to put aside huffing and puffing and tutting, okay? Now I'm getting to be a woman of a certain age, and I'm told that you should always have a good array of tuts and sighs by the time, you get to my age. But actually, it is quite funny, and people sometimes react quite badly to some of the statistics because they are shocking and they make us feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. But if you can get over that and start engaging with some of the issues, we'll have a much jollier talk. Okay. So in some cases, this campaign that I've been involved with for many years has led to public vandalism. Okay, here is an example of one of the posters that I put up when I was gainfully employed by Shropshire Council. This was in the loos, in the committee corridor. It's the ladies' loos, so I'm assuming it's a lady who scribbled on it. I will tell you what it said. You don't have to try and work out what it said on there. But someone was so incensed about the fact that there's a poster up explained that we could all save money that she got really angry about it and scribbled on it. So you just need to be aware that you might get a little bit upset. I do get asked, and completely understandably, where do all the figures come from? And like all good, statistical reports, all that is available in the public domain. All the research that's been done, and yes, it did include fingertip searches of people's waste, is pretty robust. The methodology is 134 pages, so if you want to come and argue with me about how it's put together, please read that report first. But there's some excellent research. There's always someone who wants to argue about the figures rather than the issues. It's all available on wrap.org.uk. That's the Waste and Resources Action Programme, who actually underpin this whole campaign and others like it. So there you go. So be prepared to be shocked. It's a bit miserable to start with. We will come out on a positive towards the end, so hang on in there. Okay, I'm going to be speaking mostly about food from our households at the moment. So the figures that I show you are shocking enough for household waste. And so that's just something that we can actually do something about, and it's all close to our hearts. So the food that we waste in this country is absolutely staggering. 7.1 million tonnes, and that's more than packaging, which always surprises people because I've worked in waste management for a very long time, and usually, particularly in the early days, if you ever were foolish enough to mention what you did as a career, people come and talk to you about packaging, and that's understandable. We have those blister packs, don't we, where you have to get into the toolbox to open up the package to get into something like a toothbrush. I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it? And for some reason, we see the packaging and we get cross about it, and actually obviously since David Attenborough has really kicked off the whole thing about ocean plastics, it's been a godsend for people like me who work in the sector, because he has just drawn the attention of most of the nations to this big problem, and he's obviously much more famous than I am. But we see the packaging and we get cross about it, but for some reason we just don't seem to see the food that we waste. It kind of disappears into our bins and it doesn't quite register. And I'll come on to some reasons why that might be a little bit later on. Now, I'm afraid I'm not going to let you off the hook by saying, well, actually most of that is pips and peelings and bones and claws. It's not. Most of that 7.1 million tonnes could have been eaten if we as individuals and as families had been a little bit more organised about how we shopped and cooked and stored our food. So only 2.1 million of that is inedible, so that's the things that obviously you don't eat and often can end up on the compost heap. So that's a lot. That's a huge amount. And of course that figure is household waste. So it doesn't include, you know, we've seen those shocking pictures of fish being discarded, of crops just being ploughed back into the fields. It doesn't include the stuff that comes from pubs and clubs and restaurants. That's a whole other area, which I won't cover today. Now all that food waste has got to go somewhere and end up somewhere and be dealt with. Now we're seeing gradually a much kind of larger rollout of separate food waste collections. Those of you that perhaps have nipped over the border from Wales, or you know have friends over there, have known that Wales and Scotland for a long time have had separate food waste collections. Not quite sure what's happening in bits of Shropshire. Some you can include it with the green waste, and I think Telford and Wrekin are looking at doing something. So there is an increasing number of food waste collections. So there's that. There's some composted at home, which is great. 1.6 million is put down the sewer. And I'm not talking about just the occasional bit of, you know, milk that's gone off. I'm talking about entire meals getting flushed down the loo. If you are of a nosy disposition, waste management is a fabulous career because you get to find out all sorts of things about people's habits, I'll tell you. So, you know, 1.6 million down the sewer, but most of that food waste just ends up in the bin. And because of that, it's obviously costing us an absolute fortune. As households, we waste 14.9 million, and that's every year, and I've put the noughts up, not because I don't think the university of the third age aren't capable of working out their trillions and their billions, but I think since we had the crash, didn't we, the kind of billions and trillions just get kind of bounded around, and you lose track. So to put that into, I used to, when I first started doing this stuff, I used to put this in the context of HS2. And I used to say, well, you know, 3 years of food waste would pay for these big infrastructure projects like HS2, but we all know that obviously it's going to be, you know, a decade's worth, and so it goes on. But do you remember a little while ago they launched the new aircraft carrier? Does anyone remember that? We couldn't afford the planes to go on it, but we have the ship. And that would pay for 2 of those. I'm not necessarily that's what you want to spend your money on, but just to put it into context. And here's a challenge for you with the political turmoil. When you next see the news and a large figure comes up for what we need to spend something on, whether it's social care, which I know is hugely important, whether it's to do with the funding gap in education, you just think, actually, there's a huge amount of money that we end up wasting as individuals. So the average family, which is, you know, 2 children, 2 adults, waste £77 a month, and single-person households waste about £16 per month. And I will come on to the issues with just how difficult it is to manage food in small households. I know that the world is against the third of us that actually live on our own. It's quite tricky to manage that. Okay, so on top of that, that's the cost to individuals. And I know a lady said to me once, she said, I told my son about food waste, and he said, oh, well, it doesn't really matter, does it, Mum? Because once you've paid for it, it doesn't matter if you waste it. And I know, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do, that kind of response? Anyway, so on top of that, of course, you've got the disposal cost of having to deal with just that sheer amount of rubbish. So for a rural county like Shropshire, you can imagine just the sheer cost of trundling all those large bin lorries around, which don't have a huge kind of miles to the gallon ratio, as you can imagine. And particularly, you know, a few years ago before the incinerator was built, there's a tax on every tonne that goes to landfill, and it was brought in 1996, and it was quite a blunt instrument, but it tried to rebalance, making recycling and waste reduction a cheaper option. And I want you to kind of guess, with your vast knowledge about tax affairs. Okay, I'm going to tell you that in 1996, when the tax first came out, it was around about £8 a tonne. So I want you to guess whether the tax has gone higher or lower since 1996. You want to have a guess? Higher or lower? What do you think? Higher. Oh, yeah, and you'd be right. Yes, it's around about £80 a tonne. So although now we're kind of seeing more incineration come in, just often it's one of those kind of moments with an audience where the penny drops. So we say, well, seriously? We're paying £80 a tonne to landfill perfectly edible food in a hole in the ground. You know, that's nuts, when we've got libraries that need to keep opening and social care issues. So I warned you it's a bit depressing to start with, but hang on in there, folks. Now, one of the interesting things about food, particularly in landfill, but just disposing of food, and historically the food that's gone into landfill is still causing us some problems. People often say, well, they feel automatically bad about food waste. I don't have to stand here and labour that point about how shocking it is. But somehow, and a long time ago when we actually did an attitude survey in Shropshire about people's attitudes to food waste, they all felt bad, of course. But they also believed the myth that it somehow just goes away. Because food is organic and biodegradable, somehow that doesn't kind of matter because it just sort of disappears, doesn't it? Well, it doesn't. If you've ever been on holiday and left, say, a bag of lettuce in the bottom of the fridge and you've forgotten about it, do you know what it's like when you come back 2 weeks later? But yeah, it's mostly women that nod when I say that, but I don't want to be sexist. So organic waste in a landfill, it doesn't rot down into a useful compost or anything like it because there's no oxygen to help it do that. It just ends up in rather a nasty, almighty, squidgy mess, and it produces a couple of things. One is methane, a very potent greenhouse gas, and of course, the debate about the amount of methane produced by herds of cows has been very much in the news recently. It's quite a potent greenhouse gas. But also it produces leachate, which is a nasty liquid, which can't be allowed to escape out into the environment, and it is actually pumped out of landfill sites and treated, just to reassure you. But that all adds to the cost. And if you think about the food waste that's been sitting in landfills for perhaps 10, 20, 30 years, it will still be producing methane decades afterwards. So if any of you have ever seen a landfill site that's been covered over and they've kind of grassed it up and planted trees on it, it will often have vents sticking out of it, and often you have to measure what's happening with the methane for years and years afterwards. And it's just one of those kind of annoying things that you can't often do anything very useful with it because most landfill sites are way out in the countryside, so it's not a case of just being able to suck it out and do something helpful with it, like stick it into the mains gas supplies. It's more complicated than that. So big implications for just chucking food away. And the other one is these are really, there are lots of really startling stats in this talk, and I know it doesn't feel like we're a water scarce country, does it? But I know that there are huge concerns with the changing climate about just how we're getting our rain. It seems to be unpredictable. Some areas, particularly in the east of the country, really struggle. And I know when we've had dry springs, potato farmers here in Shropshire have just been tearing their hair out. We're used to the concept of a carbon footprint, aren't we? But someone's been doing some really interesting work on the water footprint associated with our food. And the food that we throw away gobbles up 4% of our water footprint. And if you think about something like a washed bagged salad, how much water goes into the growing and the production of it, the washing it. And then you throw away, the country throws away millions of pounds worth of salads because we just don't get through it in time. That's a huge water wastage. So I think it's 12 buckets of water to produce a loaf of bread, something like that. It was quite, lots of foods are quite water intensive, obviously. And then the one that really shocked me, and I worked for an environmental charity when this came up, it was one of those moments where the group just sat there and went, that's huge. The land that's used to produce food in the UK, that's then wasted, I know poor old Wales is always picked as almost the size of Wales. It's almost the size of Wales. And globally, the land that's set aside to produce food that's wasted is almost the size of China. So I know, and it's a shame you haven't really got time to go into the depths of complicated things to do with farming and land use. But we're at a crossroads now with post-Brexit agriculture policies, possibly going to be looking at paying farmers for public goods, paying farmers for not just food production, but also doing things to do with floods prevention or encouraging pollinators. And I'm thinking and I know that the narrative, because I tend to get it early, listen to Farming Today on Radio 4 and end up shouting at the radio like many of us do. But that constant narrative of we need more food, we need more food, we need more food, is never actually challenged in the context of we're also throwing away a third of what we buy. So it's a really interesting issue to do with that. And so, although most of the figures I'm talking about are UK, I did come across this one because it is a problem right across the globe. And this one really shocked me. Global food waste. If food loss and waste were a country, it would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter on the planet, surpassed only by China and the United States. So big impact there. So how come that food has such a massive impact on the climate? It's partly because when we waste food, we're also wasting everything that went into its production. So it's not just a case of the humble carrot disappearing into landfill. It's thinking about all that work that went into getting that carrot that far. So a good example would be something like a beautiful piece of Shropshire Blue cheese. Those of you that have been involved in, farming and food production, just the amount of effort and energy and water that's needed to, look after the cows, to do the milking, to tank the milk off the farm, to actually do the cheese production, to do the refrigeration and the wrapping and the packaging and then moving out to the shops. So in each bit of food waste comes trailing in its wake a huge amount of resources that go into getting it there in the first place. So throwing away good food in the UK is responsible for about 22 million tonnes of CO2 every year. You think, well, that's a big number, but what does that actually mean? Well, it's the same as taking 1 in 4 cars off the road. So that is really quite a big carbon impact. And to be honest, for those of us particularly living in rural areas, it's much easier to waste less food than it is to give up our cars, isn't it? But it's a big amount. So quick thing about here's a hint, and I think only about 5 people, I think I've done this for about 150 times, only 5 people got this trivia question right, but you are the U3A, okay, so the pressure's on. Who invented the pie charts? It was not Mr. Pie. Yay, thank you, who said that? Prize to the left. Yes, Florence Nightingale invented the pie charts to demonstrate who died of what in the hospitals, and she's trying to explain to the British Army about why they needed to do certain things in hospitals. Yes, she invented pie charts. That's not a very interesting pie chart, but I always put that in there just because I think one of these days that's going to come up as the last question in a pub quiz or even on Millionaire. Okay, so if you win, I want a cut of the money, okay? So that's just there, it's a dulge, but it's just to show that every imaginable type of food gets wasted. It's not what I call just the usual suspects. But to put that in some kind of scary context, every day, 20 million slices of bread end up in the bin. It's usually about 1/3 of each loaf. And I know there are issues with the fact that loaves are in a standard size, 800 grams. That's a lot to get through if you're living on your own or there's 2 of you. That's a big issue. So, almost 1 million bananas and 1.5 million homemade meals. Folks, what does that say about the standard of our cooking? Or, I think as many of you are going to be looking after grandchildren during the holidays, what does that say about the fussiness of small people? I know that one of the things that when I speak to WIs, they tear their hair out over sort of restaurant culture. What would you like for dinner, darling, rather than me, this is what you're having, which is the way that I was brought up. Yes, there's some sympathy there. Okay, the largest thing that we waste in terms of just sheer tonnage is potatoes. The humble spud, 4.4 million every single day. 96 million tonnes of sausages. I know. Someone actually worked out how many animals die in vain. That's not actually to make a flippant, I happen to be vegetarian, but it's big issues there to do with the millions of chickens that just go through the system and get wasted. There's a whole ethical issue there as well. Something that's really easy to waste, isn't it? Even with people that always tell me they never waste anything. I'll say, do you ever have trouble judging the right amount of rice? And I find it's very easy to do, isn't it? Because you pop some in the pan, don't you? And then you do the pan peer, don't you? Tip the lid off, you peer in. Yeah, nah, not quite, just in case, isn't it? We're very much a just in case film culture, so it can go to some more. I did actually work with someone who said, I don't know how much rice to use, so I stick in the whole packet and see how we go. I told you there's some really shocking things going on. Okay, so rice and pasta. And then, I know, that is shocking, I know. And even more wine, can you believe it in that? The only 2 groups I've ever spoken to that were not shocked was I was speaking to a group of Methodists. I thought, I forgot about that, so I skipped on to the next slide. But another was a group of social workers. They have it's a tough career, I think. But they sat there absolutely po-faced, and I said, it's just tragic, isn't it? And he said, well, at least nobody drunk it. I thought, I'm in the presence of the food police, aren't I? But yeah, it's astonishing. Huge amounts of things that just last forever still end up in the bin. And then I think, which is the most tragic slide for my entire presentation, yeah, including nice ones, so not just the rubbish ones. You know, every family has their likes and dislikes, don't they, in the tin. So toffee pennies, am I going to upset people? I know some people, toffee pennies have their fans, don't they? But and then you try to kind of palm them off, so I always find when I go back into the office after Christmas, everyone brings in the ones that nobody likes. It's either soft centres versus hard centres and all the rest of it. But even nice chocolates end up in the bin. Tragic. Now this, here we go, breakfast cereal. Now for those of you that of course are going to be feeding small people, might not be surprised by this, because out comes the bowl, in goes the cereal, on goes the milk, it goes soggy. I don't want it anymore, and you know, yeah, is that familiar to some of you? Yeah, that's huge. So then finally, this tale of misery, because we are a yoghurt producing county. 1.2 million yogurts thrown away every single day, and that probably means that the pots are likely to get thrown away as well, even though yogurt pots can be recycled. And when I was kind of talking about this with a group of people, they say, well, we are so wedded to the fact that multi-packs equals cheap, aren't we? And in some cases, that's true. But talking to people about yogurts, they say, well, I always get the multi-packs because they're cheap. But you don't work for yogurts. And I'm not really keen on the peach Melba either. You know, and so actually they end up with, which is sometimes what we all do, is that the flavours we're not so keen on, they just get pushed to the back of the fridge, where they sit for a considerable amount of time. So yeah, yogurt wastage is a big issue. So, be honest, folks. What are you thinking right now? I don't waste food. It's all the young people. I grew up during the war on, you can remember, rationing, which of course went on until 1956, so a long time. I don't waste food because it goes to dogs, the chickens, or the council collection. Shropshire people are too poor to throw away food, and I blame the supermarkets. So is anybody thinking any of those things? Because if you're not, you're the most unusual audience I have ever spoken to. Okay, this is where I sometimes see an audience signal because there's someone bursting to say all these things. You know, I blame the supermarkets. Okay, all of those are myths, and we're going to bust them. Okay, in the next few minutes. So I did warn you in for an uncomfortable ride. Okay, let's start at the bottom with the I blame the supermarkets. Now I know that it's very annoying because most of us do not live in houses of 4 or 6, do we? And therefore, when you're trying to buy smaller portions of stuff, it's not that easy, and it becomes very expensive if you go and try and buy individual portions. Now, they are alive to that fact now. It has taken a while for supermarkets to sort of get to grips with this issue, and they are coming up with smarter options where sometimes it might require a little bit more packaging, but it saves the food waste, which has a bigger environmental impact. So sometimes you can buy a pack of bakery, you just split it and put one in the freezer, or they've got kind of pockets in their packaging so you can pull out a little bit at a time and use it. But actually, supermarkets are responsible for only very small amounts of waste, and it's partly because, as you know, they are ruthlessly competitive. I mean, they're springing up everywhere. I've had an Aldi and a Lidl built near me recently. And therefore, if they do waste food, or food just goes, you know, off and they can't sell it, they're clobbered by the same disposal costs as anybody else, which is why things are yellow labelled and they go out the door. And if you take advantage of the yellow label and the food doesn't get wasted, that's great. You know, I'm not against that at all. But unfortunately, when you actually look at where the food waste comes from, supermarkets, it's just a tiny proportion. Its households are about 69%. But retail and you know, the kind of manufacturing make up some of it. So I'm afraid we can't take refuge in blaming supermarkets entirely. I was doing a talk once and someone got up and did a rant about supermarkets, and it was all kind of, it's all your fault, he said, pointing at me, you young people. I thought, I like this man, after all, you young people, he said, we need to go back to the good old days. So here we go. The good old days where the housewife put a basket on her arm and went shopping every day. And in my head, I had the picture of Joan Hickson as Miss Marple. You know, straw hat, basket on her arm, going around St Mary Mead, going to the fishmongers, solving a murder, going to the grocers, you know. I mean, it sounds lovely, doesn't it? And I said, I love that kind of, I like going to Ludlow and pottering around the market, but the reality is, I said to him, because I was going to cut him off, I was going to talk all day, the reality is, I work full time, I do a voluntary job on top of that, so I am really grateful There are some places where I can access chocolate 24/7 should the need arise. Okay, that's my rant about supermarkets. Anyway, let's look at the others. Shropshire u3a, said somebody in my talk. Actually, it was an elected councillor, which just shows the level at which they're kind of... Well, actually, Shropshire people waste as much food as almost anyone else. It's almost the largest proportion in the bins, so I'm afraid, folks, we can't let ourselves off the hook on that one either. I don't waste food because it goes to dogs or chicken or a council collection. Well, it's great it's not ending up in landfill. But if you are feeding your dog on food that's fit for human consumption, that's a very expensive way of doing things. And council collection, I always think of, that's the ambulance fleet at the bottom of the cliff. And much as I love working in waste management, and I'm very fond of it, there has always been a culture of focusing on the ambulance fleet at the bottom of the cliff, because that involves proper waste management as a bottom mindset, by which he meant lorries, trucks, and kits, and hard jacket, kind of fluorescent jackets, and proper waste management, he described it to me. Whereas my area of work is mostly focused on, let's just put a fence at the top of the cliff instead to stop people falling over the top. He described that rather foolishly as, this is Joy, she does the fluffy stuff at work. Don't worry, folks. I edited a magazine and I got my revenge in a sort of opinion piece later on. So there we go. But so it's great, but actually, we need to kind of focus on not wasting in the first place. And for the compost heap, if you really are putting all those kind of pre-washed salads and stuff that required so much to make in the first place straight onto the compost heap, that's really quite a wasteful way of dealing with organic food. So let's have a look at the top three. I don't waste food, it's all the young people I grew up during the war. Well, you're not alone if you think it's not you, because even those that are absolutely adamant that they don't throw away, about 86% of people are convinced they don't waste any food, which would mean that 7 million tonnes is being chucked out by just, kind of 14%, which we know isn't the case. We usually talk about 90 kilograms. And I said to you at the very beginning, for some reason we see the plastic and get cross about it, and we just don't seem to see the food. Well, this is a classic example. I was doing this talk, and a lady sat in the front row, keeping very good. I have heard very little muttering, but she muttered all the way through my talk. There's a lot of tutting, huge amount of tutting going on, and all I could hear all the way through was, I don't waste food. And all the way through, and right at the end, she hopped up and said, well, I don't waste food. Although the other day, I bought I had a bag of watercress, and I could only eat half of it, so I had to throw half of it away, but I don't waste food. And although we laugh at it, it's because when I talk about food waste, people think I'm talking about a deliberate decision to just be careless and feckless and chuck food away. And that's not how it happens. It usually creeps up on us. So this is what I translate that out. I don't waste food, it just went off. I.e., it's the food's fault. And although we laugh at that, like consolation about one of the biggest reasons we waste food is just because we just don't get around to eating it in time. So it's not that we intend to waste food, it sort of runs away from us. Okay, so here we are. This is what was written on the poster. This is an insult. Older people do not waste food, only the young with more money and sense. I think she meant than sense, but her ire had obviously overcome her grammar. Don't tar everyone with the same brush. I wanted to start a sort of graffiti war saying, I am really offended that you think I just make up statistics, but I decided I would just remove the poster and put a fresh one up. But there you go, you can see how people get very cross about this issue and they feel bad about it. So I think there's almost one more graph of doom before we move on to the positive. And this was the one that really upset a lot of people. When the campaign first came out, which was 2007, when they first did some really in-depth research into who was wasting food and just the size of the problem, which really shocked the waste industry. We knew how much organic waste there was, but no one had ever done the research to say, well, how much of that could have been prevented? Is it all vegetable peelings, or is it still vegetables still in their packaging? So out came this graph, which really surprised all of us. Who's wasting food? This is food waste by age group. And it's really interesting. I know, people are like, we could talk about that forever, and some people get very incensed about it, but actually it tells us lots of useful things. But the two biggest things to notice is that every age group wastes food, and they waste similar amounts. There's not massive differences between them. Now, the reasons why food waste occurs with different ages do change, and I've already alluded to the fact that older people at the end, and actually apparently the graph drops down, they've done some more research since then, so the post-65s are much better. It's often to do with food management is really tricky in a world that's designed for kind of families of 4 or 6. So it's not that you're rubbish at dealing with food, it really isn't. At the other end, you've got an age group that possibly haven't got the food management skills. And there's really good stuff being done in schools now, which is great about food. And I was that lucky generation that had proper home economics, as it was called. But there's a generation just below me that missed out on that, and they did food technology, which apparently, talking to a friend who's of that kind of batch of people that went through, you were asked to design pizzas that could be taken to the moon, but you weren't taught how to boil an egg or peel a potato. And so there's a gap there, people are just not very skilled. But the 2 groups that waste the most, the 25 to 35 possibly won't surprise many of you, okay? But what on earth is going on with the worst age group, the 55 to 64s? Tut, what's happening with them? Well, you know how marketing people love to push us in pigeonholes. So you've got the rich retired, the silver surfers, the up-and-coming urbanites, you know, the hipsters, all the rest of it. Well, that particular group, they have labelled as the hotel parents. It is people that have got older children that treat the place like a hotel. Does that sound familiar to anybody here? And it's often because, as many of you know, housing prices are so much higher, so that after university people come back and live at home. And actually, I've got friends in this category that say it's not because they're rubbish at managing food, it's just they're defeated by offspring that change their mind at the drop of a hat. So things like, oh, I forgot to tell you I'm going out with my friends, I'm staying over, I'm out at the pub, oh, do you mind if I bring back half the rugby team with me for dinner tonight? Those sorts of things makes it really complex. And also that age group, often you might well have kids who go away to university, and having catered for a certain number for many years, to suddenly have to adjust that is really quite tricky. And one of the men behind the original campaign had twin daughters that went to university at the same time. And he said, even though I know all this stuff and I know what I should do, he said it took forever to adjust the cooking portions because we always cook for 4 and then it's 2. There is hope for the hotel parents, okay, if you're stuck in that category. The next age group on, the marketing people called the unconstrained couples, which sounds terribly daring and exciting, doesn't it? So what I think it means is those that have finally pitched off their children out of the house. And they're saying that but they still shop with them in mind. There's a really interesting piece of research about how people, they go around the shops and say, oh, I've seen a leg of lamb and it's on special offer, I'll give that to my daughter-in-law, I'll drop that off at my son's house. And I have a friend who's got a fantastic mother-in-law who will just pitch up with casseroles and things like that, which is really kindly meant. But my friend has to plan now for kind of mother-in-law days when food just kind of comes from outer space, which is great. Okay, so why is food wasted? Lots and lots of reasons. They are not all going to disappear overnight. We are not all going to turn into Miss Marples, going around with a basket on our arm, trundling around the markets. That's not how life is. There are lots and lots of reasons, but there are 2 main ones. One is preparing and cooking too much. I've already mentioned, haven't I, the fact that as a culture we like to do it just in case. And I think you see that at its most extreme at Christmas, where you see people with a trolley in both hands, don't you? You think, well, I want to come to your house, it's amazing. And we buy stuff for, often wedded to, has anyone ever had the kind of bread sauce debate in your house, where we always have bread sauce at Christmas because it's tradition? Nobody likes it, but we make it anyway. Those sorts of things, yeah. I think a piece of Radio Shropshire, I said every single year, without fail, someone will phone me and say, we always have too much turkey. I say, have you thought about buying a small one? No, because we always have a large turkey as part of the tradition. Okay, so that's one reason. And it can be cultural. We like to be generous, don't we? Groaning tables and all the rest of it. My sister-in-law is Kenyan, and in Kenya it's considered rude to clear your plate. So you're always supposed to leave a little bit on the plate, because otherwise it suggests your hostess is being mean. I'm not for a moment suggesting that the Kenyans that live in this country are responsible for vast amounts of food waste, but there's all sorts of cultural things to do with food and being generous and making sure that there's enough, and that's quite a difficult one to unpick. So the other one, as I said, not using food in time. It's not my fault, it's the food's fault, it went off. And that can be due to a combination of things. So lack of planning, people rush, they dash into shops on the way home from work, they grab things, understandably, people are juggling, jobs and life and childcare and everything else. People's plans change. It's hot today, isn't it? I don't think any of us are going to fancy turning our ovens on. You might get whisked out to dinner. You might, anything like that might happen. One lady said, no, it's always happened to me. So my husband keeps coming home and taking me out to dinner. And the rest of the WI was like, no need to be smug, lady, really. But she said, no, we get as far as the chip shop in the village. Confusion over dates, and I'll cover dates in a minute. Confusion over dates on our food. Unsurprisingly, we used to have up to 4 dates on packets of food. It's not surprising that stuff got chucked away. And then lack of confidence in the food. The marketing people call this food blindness. So I'm going to use an example. You know how it is when you get an invitation to go out to somewhere nice. Either it could be a wedding, a new event, a posh event, you know, trip to the palace, whatever it is. And you go upstairs and you open your wardrobe door, or wardrobes, and you have a look at what you've got. What do you say to yourself? Oh, nothing to wear. Nothing to wear, exactly. And it's rather like, instead of this, it's food blindness is there's a fridge full of food, but people open the doors and I've got nothing to eat. And they're not being facetious. What they mean is they haven't got those skills to just take a bit of that and a bit of that and put it together. It's those old-fashioned cookery skills. And the more research that's being done is that the more food's getting wasted because of those lack of basic skills. And some of that is because the time used to cook and prepare family meals has dropped from about an hour and a half in the 1980s down to about 19 minutes now. And I'm not saying for 1 minute that everyone is feeding their children rubbish. I'm not saying that at all. But because many people are time poor, they'll go for the options of the really high quality ready meal stuff, but ready prepared veg because it's quicker. So there's opportunities to learn, like many of us did standing next to our mums or our aunties or our grannies, to learn what you do with a cauliflower and how you tackle, you know, a chicken from scratch, that kind of thing. The time to learn those skills has kind of disappeared. So, now to the good news, because you've been very good at hanging on to people bad. The good news is there is lots that can be done to reduce food waste, loads and loads. And thankfully, most of it is easy, okay? And once people get over the it's not me, it's everybody else making the load, they're really quite keen to give it a go. Now, Love Food Hate Waste is a national campaign. And it's all backed up by really good scientific research, but the public-facing campaign is very kind of user-friendly. And the focus is quick and easy tips. I don't want anyone to think that Love Food Hate Waste is somehow some sort of posh food programme that suggests that we should all be spending 48 hours boiling an ox carcass on the Arga to make our own stock. You know, I say just, if that's your bag, then that's fantastic, but I'm just happy to use a stock cube, okay? There's a whole programme on stock on Radio 4 the other day. I thought, really? Really? Anyway, so the focus is quick and easy tips. So my 5 top tips for saving food and money for you all. One is a bit of planning. If you're a natural planner, you'll find that easy. If you can't bear the thought of being constrained by a plan or a timetable, and that's me, this is slightly more challenging. I plan for gaps, actually, so that very rarely do you need a kind of a weekly plan, because often you might get whisked out to dinner to the chip shop if you're lucky. You might have a mother-in-law drop in with a casserole. So it's always good to sort of plan, and if there are gaps in your planning, then it's worth pulling out some of those things from the freezer that are hidden away, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Really good tip, and it might make you laugh, but checking the cupboards and rummaging the fridge before shopping, because usually it's always something that's been pushed to the back. In my case, it's usually a red pepper and a box of eggs, but just occasionally, housework has its own reward, doesn't it? And I defrosted the ice box, and instead of there being the usual escape frozen pea, there was an entire bottle of homemade limoncello that I put in there to chill. So it had been there like a frozen mammoth, you know, for months in the freezer. It's always good having a rummage, because we know that in the early days of the campaign, we did find that there were people who would go out shopping, come back, and they'd open their fridge, and it's quite shocking, they put the bin in front of the fridge, put their arm in, and scoop the whole contents in. Since this campaign started just before the start of the financial kind of collapse, and so you do see less of that behaviour now. And then shopping list, isn't it? The trick with the shopping list is to remember to take it with you, isn't it? Yeah. We've all stood there in the shop, haven't we? It's on the counter at home, and you're trying to, what was on there? I did a talk with a group of lasses that were shown to be nursery nurses. They're great fun. And we were talking about shopping and planning. And one of them said, you know, my mum is ace. She never comes home with something that's not on the list. We thought that's really quite creditable, isn't it, considering the amount of advertising power there is. She said, no, she's great. She takes a blank list with her, and when she puts things into the trolley, she writes it down. Okay, befriending the freezer. We are really good in this country about putting things into the deep freeze and in it goes, and it will stay there for months. And that is a perfectly valid way of using a freezer. I'm still on last year's fruit, and it's lovely. And it's not surprising that we have got something like £500 million of what we call UFOs, so it's unidentified frozen objects, sitting in our freezer. Very easy mistake to make, isn't it? You're in a rush, you think, I must get that in the freezer, you pop the lid on it, you stick it in. Someone's stolen the labels, you can't find the pen. I'll remember what that is. Just like the passport, isn't it? I'll put it in a safe place. And then you come back to it months later, you think, I've no idea what that is. I made that mistake once. I grabbed something that was purple, and I thought, that's the plums I need for the crumble. And it turned out to be red cabbage, apple and onion, which is lovely, but rubbish with custard. We don't tend to think of using the freezer for short-term storage, because I said that the biggest reason we waste food is because it just goes off before we get a chance to eat it. And most of our expensive foods we tend to keep in the fridge, so meats, cheeses, ready meals, fish, that kind of thing. And so thinking of the freezer as a pause button, just popping stuff in there, even if it's for 24 hours, means that if you do get whisked out to dinner or mother-in-law comes round, that stuff is going to be perfectly safe and it can just sit there. So I tend to unpack my shopping and freeze as much as I can, just in case. And one of the great things the campaign has managed to do is bust a few myths about freezing. That notice that used to be on packaging saying freeze on day of purchase? That really confused people, because some people thought, well, I haven't frozen it on the day I bought it. Does that mean I now can't freeze it? I'm not going to get around to eating it, therefore into the bin it goes. So the national campaign had managed to get most of the major food suppliers and supermarkets to change that to say you can freeze this right up to the use-by date, which is good news. So here's the things you might not have thought about freezing that I have experimented with. Chopped raw onion, I've done basically most of my recipes start with that, and we're getting into the holiday season and the weather's going up. Onions, the minute your back's turned, will all start sprouting. So I find that and also because I cry with onions, I might as well get the pain over in one go. Chop it, freeze it, wrap it really well, double wrap it, folks, otherwise you'll... but it's just like frozen peas then. It means you get exactly the right amount and drop it straight in the pan and fry straight from frozen. Cheese freezes well, it goes more crumbly, hard cheese will go more crumbly. So you can, because it's quite expensive cheese, isn't it? So if your favourite is on special offer, you can grate it and freeze it as a block. Stilton freezes well, and it just goes very crumbly, so if you're going to cook with it afterwards, that works quite well. And recently I've been experimenting with the softer cheeses. A lady at WI said she froze half a wheel of brie just because she just couldn't bear the thought of chucking it out. And she reserved it on her cheese board, and so it was lovely. I've used it for cooking, and that seems to work quite well. Here's a top tip for those of you that have lots of people around for Sunday lunch or for Christmas, is that if you've got a bag of potatoes that are going a bit green and sprouty, which kind of happens in this weather, if you just parboil them, cool them down, toss in a bit of oil, pack them into bags and freeze them, you can drop them straight in the fat and roast straight from frozen. And often the freezing action would have fluffed up the edges a bit so they're a bit crunchy. So that's a job you can do kind of well in advance. Bread was quite good, particularly we've had bad winters in rural areas, we're quite good at freezing things like bread and milk. A top tip for those of you that are going on holiday, the lady said that the skimmed milk in particular freezes quite well. And she just freezes the last bit of her milk into ice cube trays. So she said, when I come back from holiday, at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you just look for a proper cup of tea that has involved boiling the water, because for some reason we can't get that to boil, can we? But she knows she's got that small amount of milk that she can drop into her tea or coffee. I thought that was a really good tip. Now, Nigella was sneered at by the critics when she did a programme where she admitted she froze leftover wine, which you might not have in your house. But the little bits, I'm not saying the dregs from the glasses, you have some standards, but the dregs from the bottles or small amounts. And my fridge is full of containers with leftover bits of alcohol. And I always wondered if something dreadful happened to me and someone wanted to do a psychological profile. They look through my freezer, cheese, wine, limoncello. So that's really handy for when you've got bits for cooking. It does deprive you of the excuse of opening a fresh bottle to put 3 tablespoons in, a sauce, and you think, well, it's open now, I might as well finish it. But it's a really handy way of just, saving those little bits for cooking. And then when I was really honest with myself about the things that I wasted the most of, are, you know, all those jars that sit in your fridge door. Anyone else have a fridge door like that? It's so easy to do, isn't it? You buy a sauce or a paste because you've seen a whizzy recipe, or you buy a jar of kind of fairly standard things like tomato concentrate, and it's got tiny writing on that says you've got to use this up within 5 days of opening, and the best will in the world. You're just not going to get round to it, are you? So I started freezing these. You know those kind of cooking sauces for you know, for curries and things. You know, they all come in giant package sizes. So I just freeze them, and actually, if I've taken some out, I'll actually put the whole jar into the freezer, and it's fine, it doesn't shatter. And you've got the label on there already. And often things like the cooking sauces, if you defrost them, they'll look a bit weird. Just give them a really good stir, and they'll make good. So things like pesto works really well. Tomato puree, and if you just want small portions, I tend to get just a roll of foil out, and I just put a dollop of these in kind of spoonful sizes, screw them all up, put them in a container in the freezer, because then at least I know that I've done it within 5 days of opening, because those kind of tubes, they can sit in your fridge for years, can't they? You actually have no idea what that is in that jar. Right, okay, so that's my top tip. Now, here we go. We love a fruit bowl, don't we? Because it looks nice. I had a friend who's a pensioner. She said, "Oh, I throw out a bowl of fruit every week." I said, "Why, Joni?" She said, "Well, I like looking at it, but I don't like eating it." So we bought some fake fruit from the garden centre, so that her kitchen looks very nice, and Jan, she saves herself a fortune. And I think it's something to do with perhaps living in the countryside, isn't it? We like the fresh air, and we think our fruit deserves the same. So we rush home from the supermarkets and we rip off all the packaging, don't we? Because it needs to breathe. But actually, packaging technology has come on such a long way that most of the packaging is designed to keep your food fresher for longer. So I know it's counterintuitive, but as I say, the weather's heating up. You can end up wasting so much fruit because it sits in the fruit bowl and just goes off, particularly that lemon that lurks at the bottom. So it's best to actually store most of your fruit in the fridge. If you're thinking my fridge is now very full of stuff, the best place to keep bread, oddly enough, is not in the fridge. It's to do with the way starch reacts at about 4 degrees, and so the bread will taste stale, even though it's not stale. So the best place for bread is actually in the freezer or on the countertop. So I'm the last person on earth to lecture anybody about portion control, but Love Food Hate Waste has got a really good kind of ready reckoner, particularly for the staples that we so often get wrong. You know, the pastas, the rice. So here's a useful thing, that half a mug of rice is usually the right amount for 2 people, and I know it doesn't look like it, but it's worth having a try with those. Dates. I know people often split down the middle on dates. We have a generation that generally like, oh, for goodness sake, sniff it, it's not going to kill you. And we have the other generation, which is if it's a second past midnight on any of the dates on the packaging, the whole thing goes in the bin. And although we laugh at that, you might well have seen younger members of your family come in and things like check dates on crisps. And I did have a lady who kind of, you know, just kind of came onto a bus when we were doing an event, and she said, help me, you know, I cooked a whole chicken, I just don't know what to do with the rest of it, so we had one meal and the rest went in the bin. They're so worried about dates. So there is a happy middle here. The key date for your safety is the use by date. That should read eat by date, and it's often on the food stats. Actually, they can make you seriously ill. One of the myths is that foods, the bugs that make you seriously ill often have no taste or smell. So although you can usually smell something's off, that's usually kind of a food spoilage bacteria, but the really nasty bugs that often can put us in hospital often don't have any smell or taste, which is, you know, why people end up in hospital, because obviously they wouldn't have eaten it had they known. So they're for your safety, and you'll find them on the kind of the cooked chill foods, the high risk foods. The best before date, however, relates to the quality, and what that really means is that the manufacturer can guarantee it's going to be absolutely at its best up to that date. After that date, it's still safe to eat, but it might not necessarily be at its best. So you will find it on those long life goods, so the dried goods, the cereals, the packaging, and don't get tempted to throw away stuff that's kind of related to Christmas just after Christmas, because if you look at the dates, it's probably a best before date that goes way into the spring. The good news is that, again, the national campaign have been working very hard with supermarkets to get rid of all these extraneous dates and try to have just one date on the packaging. And so display until and sell by are practically disappearing. because that's for the benefit of the shop, not for shoppers. So that's good news. And as I said, you can freeze food right up to the use-by date. And then finally, cooking with leftovers. When Love Food Take Waste launched, which was a long time ago, poor old person who was doing the interview with John Humphreys, he was having a grumpy day. So he was just suggesting, oh, here's just a website to tell us how to make soup. And it's like so much more than that. But it's a fantastic site for having a look for all sorts of money-saving tips and types of ideas for the kids and for lunches. And there's kind of what you need using up sections. It's got some really nice articles there. I think they include celebrity chefs and the like. So, what's been going on since I first started speaking to people in Shropshire about food waste back in 2007 when the campaign launched? We are wasting less food as a nation, which is good. So we're wasting less, but it's a long way to go. And oddly enough, when the campaign first launched, we were wasting £10 billion worth of food. We're now wasting 14.9 billion. And although we're wasting less in terms of tonnage, because as you all know, food prices, the value of the food has gone up considerably. So we still got, a lot to do. And actually what we found was we had a huge drop when the campaign launched, and I said it launched just a few weeks before some of the banks started to wobble. So although the campaign at its heart is very much an environmental campaign, most of the messages that we deal with are to get people to save money, because that's the hook that they're all interested in. And so we did see a significant drop. And then since 2012, there hasn't been a huge change in food wastage. So in the actual tonnage. So there are more people living in the UK, so we think that possibly per person we're wasting less, which is good, but obviously the overall tonnage is quite big. And we're starting to wonder whether there's now people who've done the easy things, so that some of the other behaviours are harder to change. Possibly some higher wages, possibly lower prices, so that the urgency to reduce food waste has possibly gone away. So this is what we're kind of looking at the moment. Kind of split those three ways into the avoidable, the possibly avoidable, and the avoidable. So the yellow and the orange are the ones that we're still working on. And you can see it's kind of, there's a big drop in it, and it bumbles along. But since then, an awful lot has happened in terms of just the kind of, the amount of awareness there is about these food issues. So there's a huge amount of awareness. When I first started doing this talk, people were just in complete denial about food waste actually being an issue. But sitting down talking to an MP who was convinced the largest amount of waste that he'd been was going to be nappies. And you think, no, it's food. They just didn't want to see it. I've spoken very much about household waste today, because that's something we can all do about it. But I wanted you to be assured that as much work is being done right across the food production sector. So we're getting a much more holistic approach, right from farming to food production to transport to packaging, right the way through to how supermarkets work, how we work as individuals, and then right towards the end about how food waste and the unavoidable food waste is dealt with in terms of anaerobic digestion and composting. So just haven't got time to cover all those today. Lots of work, you'll be glad to know, has been done on the hospitality and catering sector, because I know that perhaps that when you go out to a meal in a pub and you order a sandwich and a salad, you don't know whether the sandwich is going to be a sandwich or a 6-foot baguette with all the trimmings. And so there's a lot of work being done on trying to get restaurants to reduce food waste, because it's in their interest. Obviously it's very costly, and I think we're less reluctant now to ask for doggy bags. So there's that whole culture of, like they have in America, I want to take that home with me, and that's okay. So in Shropshire in particular, very proud of Snail Beach WI had their resolution. They have a resolution every year, and they discuss what they're going to talk about, and food waste was one that was picked for, I think, 2016. We have seen the emergence of food banks, and I'm not saying that the emergence of food banks is a good thing, because it obviously indicates that something has gone somewhat awry. But I want to do a really big shout out to the Shrewsbury Food Hub, which is a fantastic organisation. I suspect perhaps quite a few of you might well be involved with that. But now we're seeing fantastic networks that can redistribute food, and I think the technology has helped with that. So it's not just a case of redistributing cans, but there's the fresh fruit, and it's very well organised. And just one of the fantastic things the Shrewsbury Food Hub did, I did an event with them a few months ago, and they just gave an example about how they end up distributing food, not just to the food banks, but to a lot of the major charities that we have in Shropshire, and the Shropshire Hospice was one of those, and I think, although don't quote me on it, but I think the reduction in the food bill that Shropshire Hospice had to pay was about £16,000 because they were getting this food redistributed from supermarkets and food producers and local bakeries. So lots of good work being done, not just in Shrewsbury, obviously I know that's replicated right across Shropshire and nationally. What else is interesting is the huge concern over single-use plastics, which is great. But if you think about a lot of single-use plastics anyway are wrapped around our food. So obviously if we waste less food, we waste less plastics. So I think people are beginning to see the connection between the two, which is great. There's now a national new food waste champion as well. It's an unpaid government job, unfortunately, otherwise I'd be tempted to go for it myself. But no, you have to be a person, I think, of private means to do the job. But there's someone in place who's actually pulling together things like that, and food strategy, which is very good. And just thankfully, it's no longer a concern for cranks, you know, which is great. I've been a crank for far too long, so I'm becoming mainstream, which is was never my ambition really, but there you go. So there's lots that's happening, which is great. I hope that you've had some useful tips. Do have a look at lovefoodhatewaste.com. It's a fantastic website, and you can pitch some of your own ideas. Some of the ideas from this talk came from people that put their ideas on the website. There's an app, there's a newsletter. I'll take some questions in a minute, but if you've enjoyed this talk, I can do it for any other group that you're part of, or I'll do another talk, which is a kind of continuation of this one, about food waste campaigns, past and present. So, are we okay for time and for questions?
Yes.
Am I bang on? Okay.
Perfect.
I'll just sip my gin while you're thinking about questions. Is there a roving mic?
Does anybody have questions?
You know that it's better to cook pasta twice, so if you cook the pasta, freeze it, and bring it out, and then cook it again. It's better for your health, and of course you don't put the waste there.
Yes, oh, sorry, can I repeat the question? So, yes, it was to do with cooking pasta twice, wasn't it? So cooking pasta and rice, and then freezing it. It's supposed to do something with the way the sugars react, isn't it? It's supposed to be better for your health, but then if you re-cook pasta that's been frozen, and then you can also manage the portion size, which I think was your point. Just a caution about rice, because it often comes up. You do need to be very careful about recooking rice, and that's because there's naturally occurring botulism in rice, and that's why I tend to treat it rather like meat. So you need to cook it and eat it hot, or you need to cool it very quickly and get it cold and in the fridge and eaten the next day. Don't let it hang about. If you are going to reheat it, you need to really, really blast it, because that's the only way that you can kill off the bugs. And that's, oddly enough, that's why quite a lot of people feel ill after reheating a curry that they've had the night before, and they blame the chicken, but often it's not always the chicken, it can be the reheated rice. So there's some good stuff about reheating rice on the website, but yeah, just voice of caution there. Yeah, make sure you blast it.
Any other questions?
You're all stunned by the stats, aren't you? They are stunned.
I think the reason everybody's stunned is because we're all doing some of these things that we shouldn't be doing. And I think you covered virtually everything. I have to say, in our household, there is no danger of wine going.
Excellent.
And one of the other things I do, which might be useful, is that if I'm just using the zest of a lemon when I'm baking, I then slice the lemon up and freeze it and put it in the gin and tonic, which saves using ice.
Yep.
It's absolutely amazing talk.
Thank you.
It's really given us, pardon the pun, food for thought. And thank you very much for talking to us.
Well, thank you for listening. Thank you. I didn't hear any tuts either, so give yourself a pat on the back. There we go. Yes.